And we're going to conclude this session of People Power Health with someone who understands how people power everything. The great playwright, author, and storyteller. Please welcome him to our stage, Kevin Kling.
Thanks, John. Thanks, man. Great. Good to see you. I'm such a fan of John. I am a storyteller, and you never know where you're going to end up when you're telling stories. I'm also from Minnesota. You'll hear that pretty quick in my accent. Last year I was up in northern Minnesota touring with the Guthrie Theater doing a one-person show, and I was in Hibbing, Minnesota, where Bob Dylan is from. And we were pulling into town, and there was a big sign outside of Hibbing that said, "The Guthrie Theater presents Kevin Kling." But the February wind had blown the P away, so the sign said, "The Guthrie Theater presents Kevin Kling." I was like, I knew it. And as a storyteller, I was in the Isle of Man telling stories one time, and afterwards I was in the pub hanging out, and there was a German man there, and we were talking, and he was there watching a motorcycle race, and he couldn't believe I told stories. He says, "You're a storyteller?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "That's a job?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, you get paid for that?" And I go, "Yeah." And he couldn't believe it. And I go, "Okay, look, if you could tell a story, what story would you tell?" And he goes, "I would never tell a story." I said, "Come on, if you could write a story, what would you write?" Oh, he got all gooey and he goes, "A manual." Oh, I would write a manual to have somebody do what I told them to do. Oh, and then he got it. And I realized right then and there are manual people and there are story people. So today I'm here for the story people. And I know a lot of folks in the medical industry, a lot of folks are manual people, so just hang with me. I promise in the language of your people, the pain will never be more than a 2. Now, when I was a kid, there were 2 kinds of fairy tales. Fairy tales I hated and fairy tales I hadn't heard yet. Because they always ended bad for the guy with a disability. I mean, look at Snow White trades in 7 perfectly good little ones for 1 big one. I mean, they all ended bad. But my grandma was there. My grandma said, "No, Kevin, stories can end any way you want them to end." And here's a story that my grandma told me. She told me back in the days when pots and pans could talk, which indeed they still do, there was a man that went to the river every day with 2 pots, and he filled them with water and brought them home. Well, one day it was discovered a small crack in one of the pots, and as time went on, that crack widened until the time the man got home, all the water had leaked out of the pot. Finally, the pot turned to the man and said, "Please, please, every day you take me to the river, every day the water leaks out. Please replace me with another pot." And the man turned to the pot and said, "Look down the trail." And the pot turned and looked down the trail. And on the side of the trail with the pot that didn't have a crack, it was craggy and rocky. But on the side of the path with the pot with the crack, wildflowers grew. The man said, "Every day you water those flowers. Every day you make my difficult journey beautiful. I think I'll keep you." So those were the stories I heard from my grandmother. And that's why I think I became a storyteller, was because of stories. And, okay, we have an inner landscape and an outer landscape. Our inner landscape is how we perceive ourselves. Our outer landscape is how we perceive and are perceived by others. And they can be very different from each other. I know having a disability, the way I looked at myself was very different than the way other people looked at me. For example, people would come up and call my arm withered or crippled or say, "You poor thing," or "What happened?" But by the words they chose, I could tell whether they blamed me, my parents, God, or themselves for my condition. And with that information, I could get what I needed out of them. It's the way a kid works. I mean, and that's why I became a storyteller. My inner landscape was very powerful. I mean, when I was in junior high, okay, I'm going to take this back. My left arm, you can tell, it only has 4 fingers on this side, no thumb. When I'm working with kids in schools, I say, at the end of the show, if you want to high-five me, you're out of luck, but we can high-4 all day. And so they'll come up and they'll high-4. And my brother and I, we were learning how to ski and we were in junior high. And there was this rope tow. We have these in Minnesota where you grab onto a rope and it pulls you to the top of the hill, you let go of the rope and you ski down the hill. Well, at the bottom of the rope tow was a huge sign that said, no long hats, long scarves, or woolly mittens on the rope tow. And we're standing there in our long hats, long scarves, woolly mittens, you know, they don't mean us. And when I got to the top of the hill, I found out why that sign was there, because the rope twists as it goes up the hill. And if you're wearing woolly mittens, they actually become part of the rope tow. So I get to the top of the hill and I go to let go, but I can't. My hands won't pull free. And I'm pulling and pulling. Finally, I got my right arm free, but my left arm wasn't coming free. And it's starting to pick me up off the ground. I think, man, I got to do something here. So I let go of my brace, and my brace goes flying through the air. And the woman behind me sees it and says, oh my God, it's his arm. Boom. She's down and people are piling into her. So we did the rope tow trick the rest of the day. That's all we did. Now that's my left side. My right side, in 2001, I was in a motorcycle accident and I lost the use of my right arm. I also had that experience people talk about seeing a light. Okay, I never saw a light, but I was headed for this amazing sense of peace, and I was given the choice to follow that peace or to return to this plane of existence where it was clear even then there would be consequences. And you know what? That's always bothered me. Why did I return? Why didn't I follow that peace? And then I remember in 1987, I was in Australia. It was so peaceful, so beautiful. I wanted to spend the rest of my life there. But my visa was running out, so I knew I'd have to return to the States. And that's when this woman named Ray said she would marry me so that I could stay there. I just met her that day. She said, yeah, I don't care, I'll marry you. So I was going to marry Ray, but right before my visa ran out, right before our wedding, I said, Ray, I can't go through with this. I got to get back to the United States. I got to get back to the belly of this beast where I can do something about the world I live in. And that's when I found out I need tension in my life. I mean, I'm the kind of guy that wears socks with sandals because I know it takes people off. Mary Oliver said, it's not the weight, it's how we carry it. Johnny Cash said, talent is God-given, but our limitations are what give us our style. In a Gary Larson cartoon, one of my favorite cartoonists, he has this man, and he's clearly in the bowels of hell with fire all around him, and he's playing the accordion and singing with a huge smile on his face, and the devil's walking past saying, we're just not getting through to this guy. Resiliency is defined as maintaining one's shape. And when your shape is compromised, how do we maintain our sense of self? And that's when we turn to our stories. We give our lives value through our stories. We give them through struggles and meaning through our stories. When I can tell a story about something, it doesn't control me any longer. It's in my vernacular. It's how I see the world. The Greeks felt that stories worked like a loom. Vertically ran the metaphor, horizontally ran the sequence, and where they came together, they wove with their invisible threads their cloaks of immortality. New York City, when I first started telling stories, this is a little secret to storytelling. I was there that day. I was so excited to be in New York, my first time telling stories, and I was having breakfast that morning, and I had my eggs and potatoes and coffee and toast, and the waitress was walking past, so I asked if I could get some water, and she said, it's in the coffee. And I'm like, okay, this isn't Minnesota. I thought, I got to do something. I've got to tell a story to get people in a Minnesota frame of mind, because obviously these people see more on the subway that morning than happened in my whole life. So I started putting invitations in stories, and invitations work on they bring people into the story, but most importantly, they'll show a vulnerable side. And by telling a story where I'm vulnerable, it doesn't show that I am vulnerable, it shows that I know how it feels, and our conversations can begin. I also use humor. Humor is really important in stories because humor, contrary to popular belief, is not universal. Humor is really specific. When you laugh with somebody, it means your family, your community, your faith, you have a connection. So I remember I was in the outback of Australia one time, and I was telling ice fishing stories because I wanted to blow their minds. And they were laughing just like a bunch of Minnesotans, and I couldn't figure out why. And afterwards, an indigenous man there, Steve, came up, and I said, Steve, how did you guys get this? How did you get about ice fishing? And he said, well, we didn't get about that. But he said, you have to understand, our weather can kill us too, only from the other end of the thermometer. And I found out right then and there that we had a connection there right with weather. And so by being very specific about where I'm from, it actually became more universal. Sense of self. When we have a tragedy, we hold on to the foundations created by our family, our faith, our community. We look for solid footing. You saw it when the Twin Towers fell in New York. New Yorkers became really New Yorkers. Or in Boston with the bombing in the Marathon, or in Oklahoma City. In tragedy, you take on your community, you take on your faith. We had a bridge collapse here in Minneapolis a few years back, and I remember a man saved a whole busload of children on the bus. And afterwards, they looked to find him to interview him, but they couldn't find him. He went home for dinner. That's what you do as a Minnesotan. When it's time for dinner, you go home. As in healthcare, we're in a point of transition. We're becoming more responsible about the outcome of our own story. And I think that's a good thing. They used to have this in Greece. I was just in Greece at a place called Epidaurus. And it was a place where people would go to relax. They would go to that place where they became the dreamer and the dream. And the doctors would hide behind corners and listen through holes. The doctors were very good listeners. And then they would prescribe what the body was telling the patient. Finding that place of solace. Doctors actually there were more of a guide than a fixer. I'm reading this great book about Ojibwe trackers, and they say that a really good tracker doesn't follow it track by track as you would symptom by symptom. They look at it as an entire story. If they look at a tracks as a story, they have a lot better chance of finding their quarry. And the master trackers actually put themselves as part of the story. I think back to the doctors that have included themselves on my story. They haven't just been fixers, but they've joined in on this story as a guide or as someone following with me. I remember I was at Hennepin County after my accident, and they had to do this special test where they shot dye into my spine to see if my spine was leaking. And so in order to get it all the way up and down my spine, I had to sit on this barrel, and it would spin around so that the dye could float back and forth on my spine. But because of my arm, I couldn't hold on to the barrel. And so this poor nurse, this rather large African-American nurse, had to get onto the barrel with me. And we went around and around and around. And she was screaming like we were at Six Flags over Texas. It was like, ah! But I'll never forget her. I'll never forget her as an important part of my healing. She really did help me heal. That was the first day I laughed, and she'll stay in my heart forever as a healer. My friend Judy Daly, she wrote my favorite love poem. It goes, "Sometimes all I can do for you is the dishes. And sometimes that's enough." The Greeks felt that when we were first created, we had 4 arms, 4 legs, and 2 heads, but we had so much fun, we stopped listening to the gods. So Zeus, in his anger, split us in half, so now we only have 1 head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. But we're forever looking for that other half. We're forever looking to reconnect. We're looking for love. One of my friends is a psychiatrist that works with people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and he said the sentence that has saved more lives than any other is, "You will find love again." Stories are medicine. Depending upon how and when they're used, the same story can lead you to a battle or lead you to health. Every story is good, but it's time and place. That's what makes a really good story important. It's balance. And we have to remember that balance is actually maintaining states of imbalance. The Greeks called this kairos, the opportunity when the planets align, when the time is just right. When I was in school, I wanted to go into the arts, and my dad didn't want me in theater. I was a theater major, well, mostly because the only thing easier than a theater major was a theater minor. But my dad kept sending me letters saying he didn't want me in, well, they weren't really letters, actually. They were newspaper clippings and magazine articles with headlines like, "Actor starves to death in New York," or 2% of the actors union employed, or "Bob Crane, star of Hogan's Heroes, found stabbed to death in driveway." And my dad would send me these newspaper clippings because he didn't want me to get into theater. So when I got out of school, I said, I'm going to get into theater. So I got a job at the Guthrie, and I got a job emptying garbage, and I got to work alongside of directors. I got to watch directors like Liviu Ciulei work. Oh man, this amazing Romanian director. And I remember one time an actor was on stage, and he was doing a monologue from Shakespeare, and when he got done, Chule, in his very thick Romanian accent, said, "No, no, more eccentric." So the actor did the monologue again. This time he put a little tick in his face. And Chule said, "No, no, more eccentric." So the actor started to writhe a little bit. Chule said, "More eccentric." And now the actor is like frothing at the mouth, writhing on the floor. And Chule turns to the dramaturg next to him and whispers something. And the dramaturg nods and tells the actor, he wants you to stand more in the center. But I finally got my big chance with Leave You Chule. I got to audition for him. And I auditioned for him, and I did a piece, and he said, "Do you have anything more?" And I did. And I auditioned for over an hour and a half. And at the end, he told me, "You won't work here." He said, "You will probably never work here." But he said, "You will always work in theater. That much I can tell." And I left that audition knowing I didn't have a job on cloud 9. That's the happiest I've ever been after an audition, because one of the most famous directors in the world said I would always work. I think of that story, especially being down here at Mayo, because years ago, I tried all kinds of surgeries to try to bring back my right arm. I went through all sorts of rerouting of nerves through my intercostals, going through my brachial plexus, trying to get this arm to work again. But rerouting those smaller nerves, it kind of reminded me of when my dad rewired our garage door with a speaker wire. We parked in the street a lot. So my right arm didn't work, and I couldn't get it to work. And finally, I got in here at the Mayo Clinic, and I saw this wonderful team of doctors, and they went through all my things, and they went through my x-rays and all the information, and they sat down with me, and they said pretty much the same thing Chule said. They sat down with me, and they said, "We can't help you anymore. You've done all that we would be able to do." But they said, "Don't worry. The way you're getting around, we've watched you. You're going to be fine." And I left the same way I did that audition. I was on cloud 9 because now I can move on with my life. Now I could take my life into the next step. Now I didn't have to look backwards anymore. I could move forward. And I think that between patient and doctor, between people, that's a hard step to take. That's a really necessary, difficult step to take in many of our journeys. But when it's done at the right time, at the right place, that's the best news, because now I can go on with my life. One of my favorite stories is the story of Hephaestus, the Greek god who was thrown off Mount Olympus as a baby, and he landed and his legs were shattered. And he dragged his broken form into Hades, and Hephaestus built a forge with the Cyclops. And he's the one who created all these amazing gifts and arts for the gods. His arrows never missed, his shields could not be penetrated, and his jewelry won hearts. And Hephaestus literally used his art to take him out of hell. He became a god again. So I sing Hephaestus, god of the forge and maker of music. We all need that purpose. We need a purpose to contribute. As a storyteller, my dream is to be as valuable as a plumber. When I'm done with a story, the best compliment I can get from a kid is, "You're almost as good as my grandpa." Because that means we connected. That means we had a connection. A psychiatrist once told me, the same guy that told me earlier, that a healthy mind, he can always tell a healthy mind, because it's curious and wants to master that which makes it curious. And with work, when we work from who we are, for success, we have to work from our strengths. We have to start healing from what we do best. And this brings me to my last part of this piece, is I work at a theater company now called Iterate Theater. And this theater company is amazing. The first day that I was there, it's performers with disabilities. And the first day that I was there, we went around the room and they said, "If you could take a pill to take away your disability, would you take that pill?" And in all of the actors in that entire circle, I was the only one that said, yes, I would take that pill. And I thought, I wonder if I will ever have that day when I prefer the body that I have now to the one I used to have. And you know what, to be honest, I couldn't even imagine that could happen. But time went on, and I started to get more involved with this company. And there's this group of singers, 4 singers with Down syndrome, and they call themselves the Downbeats. And they're amazing, and they're hilarious. One of their songs, one of their members, Eric, went in to get his driver's license, but they said he couldn't have his driver's license, and when he asked why, the woman behind the counter knew a little bit about Down syndrome, so she said, "You have too many chromosomes." So he wrote a song called "Too Many Chromosomes to Drive a Car," and it is hilarious. One of their lead singer, Laura Mullen, she stands about this high. Laura, we were in a play here at Mixed Blood Theater, and we were having opening night in this real theater. We were so excited, but it was one of those nights everything went wrong. I mean, props were breaking, people were forgetting lines. Well, a fire broke out backstage. We got it out pretty fast, but the sprinkler system came on, and it sent people out into the February freezing night. Fire engines were showing up. I mean, it was pandemonium. And Laura turns to me and says, I can't work like this. Ingrid is another performer, wonderful performer. And Ingrid has aphasia, which, if you know, it makes thoughts really difficult to become words. And so when Ingrid speaks, it's almost like poetry. And she was a third-year law student when her fever took and gave her aphasia. And she told me she used to feel that I think, therefore I am. But after her aphasia, she knows she comes from a deeper place. Now she knows I am, therefore I think. And when she said that, I thought of Rumi's beautiful love poem. It goes, before right doing, before wrongdoing, there is a field, and I will meet you there. Why Shakespeare puts the lovers, the lunatics, and the poets in imagination all one. Of course, because they all go behind the mirror. They all go beyond what we perceive as real. The lovers go with another. You know, if you've ever been in love, gravity goes from a law to a suggestion. Or the lunatic has a foot in two worlds, can't help it no matter what. And the poet, like Dante, goes into the next world, and if we're lucky, brings back what they found. When Dante went to the underworld, he called it dis, D-I-S, Latin for the underworld, the place of shadow and reflection, the place where we round off the rough edges of torment and desire. Dante knew you cannot cure a trauma, whether it's a broken limb, a heart, a promise. The heart especially is an instrument once broken, never plays the same. But although it can't be cured, it can be healed. And Dante knew this. Dante knew dis was a necessary step to paradise. It's also the prefix for words like disability, which doesn't mean inability. It means able through another way, able through the world of shadow and reflection, a foot in two worlds, dis. So I'm with Interact Theatre, and we're in Australia, and we have previously, the winter before, brought 10 Australians with disabilities to Minnesota. We brought them in February, and we took them dog sledding, and then we took them ice fishing. And then the next year, we went over to Australia, and they took us into the heat and did the same thing to us that we'd done to them. And from that, I wrote a play called Northern Lights, Southern Cross. And we premiered it in Australia. On the side of this hill was 5,000 people watching this show. And when we were done with our play, two opera stars, Teddy Rhodes and Simon O'Neill, took the stage. And they got up and they sang these beautiful solos and duets. Now, the idea was, when they were done, we were going to join them for the grand finale. And so when they finished, the audience was on their feet. But during intermission, the Sydney Symphony had told us, you know, we didn't have this music long enough, and is it okay if Teddy Rhodes just finishes on one of his solos? And he said, yeah, he would. Man, we were crushed. You have to understand, our choir, we didn't just get that music 2 weeks earlier. We'd been working on that music over a year, and now we weren't going to get to join Teddy Rhodes. I mean, my choir was just crushed. And so Teddy Rhodes gets up, he sings the last song, everyone's on their feet, the 5,000 people, he's like a hero to them. And then he reaches behind his back and he pulls out this sheet of music and he gets everybody to sit back down and he says, okay, he says, we were actually supposed to finish on another number, but the symphony didn't have the music long enough, and I understand that. But he said, I've been looking at this music, and he said, I think I could play this on the piano. And on the way into the park, I passed another stage with an upright piano. I don't know if it's in tune, but if we can get to that piano, I can play this. 5,000 people didn't bat an eye. They grabbed their picnic baskets, their blankets. We all went to that little tiny stage, and Teddy Rhodes played on that piano, 5,000 people around this piano. And I mean, he took them with our choir singing with the voices of angels to that place before right, before wrong, to that place where I am, therefore I think. And at that moment, that was the first moment, there is no way I would have taken that pill. Thanks. So I just want to close with a quick poem. It's called Tickled Pink, because when you're in the health, my mom used to say you were in the pink. Sometimes in our pink innocence, we find ourselves composting, waiting to grow, or we rush headlong like so many of our ancestors. But it doesn't matter whether you're rushing or growing. One day you'll round a corner, you'll blink, and something is missing: a heart, a limb, a promise, a person, and innocence is gone. And now you're on a new path, and as though channeled through a spectrum, your course is refracted. And now some people don't recognize you, some people want the old you, and some people cry that you have left it all. But what has happened and cannot be undone. We pay for our laughter, we pay to weep. Knowledge is not cheap. To survive, we must return to our senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. We must let spirit guide us, our spirit that's found in breath. With every breath we inhale, we exhale. We inspire, we expire. Every breath holds a possibility of a laugh, a cry, a story, a song. Every conversation is an exchange of spirit, the words flowing bitter or sweet over the tongue. Every scar is a monument to a battle survived. Now, when you're born into loss, you grow from it. But when you experience loss later in life, you grow toward it. A slow move to an embrace that holds tight the beauty wrapped in the grotesque, an embrace that becomes a dance, a new dance, a dance of pink. Thanks.
So thank you, Kevin. When I was in rehab, there was always this argument over like whether a disability was better if you were born with it or if you got it later on. You're actually in a position to answer that question.
That's
Right.
really, I think that's the crux.
So which is better, to be born with it or to have acquired it later?
I don't know if it's subjective. They're really different. They're completely different. When you're born with a disability, it's just the way you are. You don't even think about it. I had a friend who is adopting a child from Russia, and he doesn't have hands. And I asked if he was born without hands, and she said yes. And I said, he's going to be fine. That's just going to be who he is. And today, he's in his 20s, and he's an artist. What happens when you achieve a disability later in life is that you have to grow into that person, because all of a sudden, you are the same person you were, but your body is different. And you do have to grow into that, and that's when it can get really bumpy. That's when
Right. So at what age were you when you got on the motorcycle?
44.
44, yeah. Did anyone say anything about, motorcycle, maybe not the best idea?
Yeah, but
Right.
I'd still get right on one right now.
Okay, right. Yeah. And I noticed you've described in your stories that you're going to the outback in Australia, rafting in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
Are you trying to get another disability?
No.
Collect another one?
There are a few things. I do have a few things still working, so yeah, I got.
Right. It's so fantastic. The story thing, though, it reminds me of it. I'll just tell is, and I'm sure you can relate to this. The story of how you got your disability is something that is rich with potential for impressing people, causing them to weep, or boring them to tears. Either way. And I discovered this. I often don't want to explain, what happened to me. I was in a car accident years ago, and I severed my spinal cord. But when my 3-year-old went to preschool, and they have show and tell, where you get up and you sort of tell a story, and it was clear to the other kids in the class that my son Ajax has a dad, who's in a wheelchair. So Ajax came to me one time and said, "Dad, tell me the whole thing." And I explained to him certain things. He said, "So why can't you feel down here?" And I said, "Well, the spinal cord is disconnected. It's kind of like on a cell phone. Okay, so up here, I've got good service. Okay, and down here, it's not really good service, and so the signal can't get to my brain down on my knees."
Yeah.
And so he would take all this stuff in, and I would go to pick him up at school, and the kids would come up and they would say, "Can you tell the story of what happened to you?" And I would explain, "Well, I was in this car accident, and I'm in a wheelchair, and now I can't walk." And the kids would look at me like, "Ajax tells that much better than you." And one kid even came up to me and said, I bet if you got Verizon, maybe you could have service.
I remember I had this kid, for a while I just would take the elevator down at that rehab and try to walk a half a block. That's all the further I could make it, and I'd get back on the elevator. And I was all wired up and I had the halo on and everything. And this kid gets on the elevator one time and he goes, I just hit my head on a fence post and I had to get 8 stitches here. I go, oh yeah, I had to get stitches from here to here, down my chest, down one arm, down one leg to the floor. And the kid turned to me and goes, yeah, but mine really hurt.
And he's right. Kevin, thanks so much. Great.